Good afternoon, fourth grade. We're going to continue reading the last two chapters of our novel, Where the Mountain Meets the Moon. Before we get started, we have a quick write. It says, describe a time when something unexpectedly positive happened to you. How did you feel? Our focus question for today, press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the focus question. Our focus question for today is, how did Minley's decision to ask Dragon's question instead of her own affect her family and her village? How does this outcome reveal the theme of the text? Our vocabulary words for today are reverently and prosperity. Reverently means that you deeply respect someone, and so this picture shows soldiers reverently, respecting someone who's died. And then the second picture, prosperity, that has to do with success or fortune or like financial riches. So you would draw a line to this picture. All right, turn the page in your notes and turn in your book to Chapter 47 on page 266. And as we're reading out loud, we are going to use our CSPS strategy. Let's get ready to read. Min-Lee, Ma and Ba's happiness burst from them like exploding firecrackers, and even before she could open her eyes, they flung themselves upon her. We'll stop right there. So after Min-Lee took the ball off Dragon's head, he was able to fly. And so she and Dragon flew all the way back to Fruitless Mountain, and Min-Lee she snuck in the house again, and she was asleep in her bed, and her parents found her the next morning. And Dragon went to live on Fruitless Mountain, and he told Min-Lee that she could keep that ball that had been on his head, his whole life. They were like, what are we going to do with this? And Dragon said, oh, you keep it. Okay, so Min-Lee is here. Her parents just found her. The joy, how it flowed and flooded over her. More golden than the king's dragon bracelet, sweeter than the peach from the queen mother's garden, and more beautiful than a goddess of heaven. Min-Lee smiled, treasuring her good fortune. Ma and Ba only stopped hugging her when her stomach began to grumble with hunger. Ma rushed to make a special breakfast, taking out the carefully saved dry pork to make Min-Lee's favorite porridge, while Ba jumped to get some fresh water to make tea. We'll stop right there because we have information about our character and setting. We know that Min-Lee has returned home and is full of joy. And so in box 1A, we would write, Min-Lee returned home and is filled with joy because she has been reunited with her parents. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the quote. And for our evidence, we would go back to that first paragraph on page 266, and we would write, the joy, how it flowed and flooded over her. That's one quote you could write, or you could write this last portion that says, Min-Lee smiled, treasuring her good fortune. Press pause to write down a quote and play when you're ready for the setting. For our setting, we can look up at the top of page 267, and we know that Min-Lee is home with her parents, and they're making breakfast. So in 2A, we would say Min-Lee and her parents are at home making breakfast. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the quote. And for the quote, we will write down this sentence at the top of page 267. Ma rushed to make a special breakfast, taking out the carefully saved dry pork to make Min-Lee's favorite porridge, while Ba jumped to get some fresh water for tea. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to keep reading. I'm in the middle of page 267. But when Ba went into the main room, he made a choking noise and caused Min-Lee and Ma to come running. "What is that?" he said, pointing. Min Li followed his finger and saw him pointing to her traveling possessions on the table. The fish swam merrily around in its bowl as the silk of her brocade bag made the sunlight skip around the room. "This is a bag given to me by the king of the city of bright moonlight," Min Li said. "It is very fine, isn't it?" "Not that," Ba said, waving the bag away. "That!" And now Min Li saw he was pointing to the dragon's stone ball. "It's a gift from a friend," Min Li said, handing it to her father. Ba took it in his hands reverently, a look of awe on his face. "This is not just any gift," Ba whispered, and he took his sleeve and gently rubbed the surface of the stone, turned the page. To Min Li's great surprise, the grayness of the stone began to smudge away. A translucent, lustrous glow seemed to shine through. "It's a dragon's pearl." Min Li and Ma stared. "A dragon's pearl?" Ma said slowly. She sat down and looked at Min Li. "A dragon's pearl is worth the emperor's entire fortune." Min Li opened her mouth, but before any words could come out, there was a great shouting and clamoring outside on the street. Ba quickly but carefully put the dragon's pearl back on the table before they all hurried out to see what the uproar was about. So if we stop right there, we have a small problem, and that's that there is something noisy going on outside. And so in 3A, we would write down, Min Li and her parents hear the people in the village outside making a lot of noise. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the quote. All right, and for the quote, we will write this quote down in the middle of page 268. That says, Min Li opened her mouth, but before any words could come out, there was a great shouting and clamoring outside on the street. Press pause to write down the quote and play when you're ready to keep reading. All right, middle of page 268. "What is it?" Ma asked, grabbing a neighbor. The entire village had flowed into the street, talking and shouting like a flock of birds discovering a feast. "What is happening?" "It's Fruitless Mountain," the neighbor said. "Fruitless Mountain has turned green." "What?" Ba said. It's true," another neighbor chimed in. "Fruitless Mountain is no longer fruitless. And the Jade River is clear and fresh, too." Min Li, Ma, and Ba looked at the mountain. It was true. Fruitless Mountain was no longer a black shadow above them. As the day dawned, the mountain had transformed. A green lushness seemed to bloom from a rock. A jewel-colored splendor softened the sharp edges that had painfully sliced the sky. The sky itself seemed to be embracing the mountain. The wind softly caressed the newborn greenery with a nurturing breeze and skimmed the Jade River, the water now as clear as tears of joy. "How is it possible?" Ma asked. "Jade Dragon must be happy again," Ba said. "Perhaps she is reunited with one of her dragon children." "Dragon," Min Li thought, and her quick thinking mind seemed to spin. Dragon said he was making his home on Fruitless Mountain. Could he be one of Jade Dragon's children? But how? Dragon was born from a painting, from paintbrushes and inkstones. And like an echo, Min Li remembered Ma talking about the artist who had come from Fruitless Mountain many years ago. He took the mountain rock to carve into inking stones. Perhaps Dragon was born from an inkstone made of Fruitless Mountain, the heart of Jade Dragon. Then perhaps he was one of Jade Dragon's children. Turn the page, and by bringing him to Fruitless Mountain, Min Li had discovered how to make Fruitless Mountain green again. "Min Li!" A villager finally recovered from the shock of the green mountain and stared at Min Li. "You're back! Look, everyone! Min Li has returned!" As the neighbors clamored around, Ma sighed. But it was a sigh of joy, a sound of happiness that floated like a butterfly in the air. "Good fortune has come to the village," Ma said, smiling, "and to us as well." "Yes," Ba said, looking affectionately at Min Li, "but the best fortune is the one that returned." Min Li smiled back, and suddenly she thought about her journey to and from Never-Ending Mountain. Min Li realized that while she had not asked the Man of the Moon any of her questions, they all had been answered. All right, so for our solution in 4A, we would write, Min Li realizes that even though she did not ask the Old Man of the Moon her question, he actually answered it because her fortune changed. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the quote. And for the quote, we would write down this last sentence on page 270. Min Li realized that while she had not asked the Old Man of the Moon any of her questions, they all had been answered. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the paragraph. And for the paragraph, it asked us, how did Min Li's decision to ask the dragon's question instead of her own affect her family and her village? And so you'll have to go back in the text on page 268 and think about how Min Li's return home has affected her village.